All right, so let's continue from where we left off last time. Last time we left off talking about economic policies. Also talking about China here. Yeah, we're going to continue kind of covering it. In China, like we have talked about before, they have the one-child policy in China. They started that off in kind of late 1970s is when they started off the one-child policy in an effort to help to reduce the population in China because they believe that a high population growth would lead to a scarcity of food, and that would cause another famine, and then millions of people then to starve to death. So the one-child policy was to stop that from happening, and it did prevent quite a lot of births and from the population of China from exploding too much. They have loosened up some of the rules a little bit on the one-child policy since then, but not totally. But they have loosened up on it. Civil rights in China. So by the time we get to 1989, there's a push for civil rights in China, freedom of speech and such. However, the big protest about freedom of speech in 1989 Tiananmen Square was unsuccessful, and the protesters were eventually driven from the square, and the government stayed in complete control of China. And that still continues today, where free speech is relatively limited in China. Internet is limited what people are allowed to post on it. If you're Google, for example, and you want to be in China, you have to make sure certain words are censored and they can't be looked up and such. So there's still a lot of control by the government over what can be said and even looked up. Main language they use in China is Mandarin. So Mandarin is the main language used in China. So there is no Chinese language, like someone doesn't really speak Chinese, but they would speak like Mandarin or Cantonese, but Mandarin being the big one. All right, let's talk about unit number 4 in sub-Saharan Africa now. And so we're talking about every place that is south of the Sahara Desert, so places that are south of the Sahara Desert. First off, let's make a new bullet, and we're going to write down Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. So bullet, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Ghana, Mali, Songhai are 3 kingdoms that are they're below the Sahara Desert and on the northwest side. These 3 kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai all specialize in the gold and salt trade. So go ahead and make a 1, gold and salt. Like we had talked about before, for both gold and salt, gold is valuable because it's malleable. You can change its shape easily. And salt is valuable because it helps preserve food at this time period. So gold and salt. In West Africa, in that area of Ghana, Mali, Songhai, they mainly did ancestor worship. So mainly worship their ancestors. So we talked about that before, and about how your ancestors would have more magical powers than what you would have. So every generation, magical powers in the family gets weaker and weaker. Most famous king of Mali is Mansa Musa. Go ahead and make a 2 and write down Mansa Musa. So Mansa Musa, he's our most famous king of Mali. I did tell you guys also about the story of Sundiata, who was able to defeat the evil rooster, wizard, sorcerer. All right, was able to defeat him. But Mansa Musa, though, is more famous than Sundiata. Mansa Musa goes on a long journey over to Mecca, goes on a Hajj, and in that journey, he spends tons of gold. So that's why he be the most famous. Speaking of Hajj, Hajj is an Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca and a mandatory religious duty for Muslims, which must be carried out at least once in their lifetime by all adult Muslims who are physically and financially capable of undertaking the journey and can support their family during their absence. So remember, that is what a Hajj is. Transatlantic slave trade. Let's make a bullet first, and let's write down colonialism. So make a bullet, write down colonialism. So bullet, colonialism. And now let's go back. Okay, so transatlantic slave trade, make a 1 and write down transatlantic slave trade. So transatlantic slave trade was the enslavement and transportation, primarily African people, to the colonies of the New World that occurred in and around the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so colonialism also goes along with transatlantic slave trade. You can see right here all the people, where they're taken from and where they're sent to. You can see how your biggest arrow here takes you down to the Brazil area, And then you have arrows that go here into Central America, and then you have some that come up here into Northern North America. You can also see where there are slaves who were sent into Northern Africa and how slaves were also sent into the Middle East. And then some slaves were sent up into Europe. Okay, so this gives you a good visual about where slaves were sent to. Oh, and some over to India as well. And so this gives you a good review of what's going on. But the transatlantic slave trade is the slave trade across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa over to the Americas. So when we're talking about transatlantic slave trade, that is what we are talking about, the transportation of slaves from Africa to the Americas. Now, speaking more about colonialism, the main reason of colonialism, the main reason why Europeans were going to Africa and setting up colonies in Africa and taking over territory in Africa from the Africans was in the search of cheap raw materials. Go ahead and make a 2, and we're going to write down cheap raw materials. So the entire goal of colonialism and taking over territory in Africa is to gain cheap raw materials from the colonies and to send those cheap raw materials then back to Europe to then be processed into other goods that can be sold for more money. All right, so I take rubber from a rubber tree in Africa, I send it back to Europe, I make then rubber shoes out of it. There you go. All right, so I took the cheap raw material of the rubber and I made it into something else I'm going to sell for more money. We also know that golden salt was in West Africa, up in here, so we talked about that before. There are also diamonds in South Africa, and that's important. Make a 3. Write down diamonds, South Africa. So we know golden salt is from Ghana, Malay, Songhai area. Diamonds we can find down in South Africa, and that's eventually going to result in a war between the Boers, the Dutch farmers, and the British, because the British wanted the diamonds. 4, ethnocentrism. Now, ethnocentrism is the belief that in the natural superiority of one's own ethnic group or culture. Okay, so if you believe that your own ethnic group or culture is the most advanced in the world, you kind of believe that your group is superior to other people. Let me give you an example. So here's an ethnocentrism example. So this says the world according to India. So you see India right here. And it says India, number 1 at thinking we are number 1. Right? Up here, Nepal, India's 29th state. Sri Lanka, tiny nation, but can play great cricket. Also, Ravan lived here. Australia, cricketers and racists. Southeast Asia, shopping. Bangladesh, immigrants. Japan, Raj Kapoor buys shoes from here. China, Communist Party of India works for them. Also cheap and worthless goods. Pakistan, terrorists train here. Russia, where our weapons come from. America fights wars here. Saudi Arabia, sheiks and oil, USA wants this. Dubai, shopping and jobs. Africa, born in us. South Africa, Gandhi was here, plus cricket. Switzerland, Shah Rukh Khan dances here. Britain, they took our wealth, but they're crappy at cricket. Canada, an extension in Punjab. America, they export jobs. And Brazil, once every 4 years, we support their football team. So this is kind of an ethnocentric view for India, in which they kind of view other places really for the lens of their own culture, right? Pretty much, unless you play cricket, they don't really care much about you, or if they, buy weapons from you and such, right? So that's kind of how it works, right? So ethnocentrism just believe that your culture is better than other people's. Some of the technologies that comes out of the colonialism time period are steamships, medicine, railroads, and the Maxim gun. Steamship is in the picture. Remember, we burn coal. The coal warms up a tank. That tank then boils, produces steam. That steam then hits the turbine. Turbine moves that wheel, and there you go. Medicine, we talked about how they came up with vaccinations. So vaccinations, taking a needle, stabbing somebody with it. And with that, vaccinations is when you take a weak form of a virus and you inject it into someone so that their body recognizes, oh, hey, this thing bad, must kill, right? So that's a vaccination. Weak form of virus injected into you so your body knows that it's bad and must be destroyed. Railroads, we talked about that before as well. Railroads made it so that you can move stuff quicker from one point to another point in a country. So railroads are good. And also the Maxim gun, which is the machine gun, allowed a small number of soldiers to defend one place. Let's go ahead and stop there for today.